Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Noble Mother podcast. I am so honored and delighted today to welcome you, Christian John. He is known as Hypervigilance on social media, but he is just such a beacon of light for so many. And we already started the podcast before the podcast, didn't we, Christian? But I'm just
A little
going
bit.
to
I
just
think that's
say
a I think that's a good omen for what's to come.
it is a good omen, but I asked for a bio, you're like, "I don't know." We just started riffing, but really today's episode is gonna encompass a lot of heart and a lot of truth, and Christian works in this realm of narcissistic abuse recovery advocate and has put his heart and soul out into the algorithms for so many to either heal from and decide what they will do with his wisdom. But today he's on and we have a lot to work through and just talk about. So, what were we just talking about? We were talking about the pinwheel. I was talking about the emotional wheel, I think, around words.
Yeah,
Your
like
heart
part
there.
work I started doing IFS in my own life just to see what it was about. Probably about a year ago, I was going through a breakup and I was not in the greatest place. But as far as like the children of narcissists, I found that parts work can be really freeing when we start to see ourselves not as this kind of singular self state, but as I like to say, all things at once, that we're feeling consciousness is all things at once, that we meet this kind of present moment through the prism of everything else we've experienced and how we've
Mm,
interpreted all those experiences. I've struggled a lot with anger in my life. And so this idea of I'm not an angry person, I just have an angry part, right? I'm not a sad person, I just have this sad part. And that it helps, I think, to see ourselves as whole human beings, that we're not in the prison of one singular emotion or self state, that we're experiencing consciousness and we're cycling through all of these things, but they're all intertwined and overlapping. And I've found it to be really freeing they use the imagery of this IFS of the seat of consciousness, right? Think of a bus and the driver is the seat of consciousness, but you have all these parts sitting in the back, kind of vying for control and beginning to untangle. And as they say, unblend them. To me, I think, especially for adult children of narcissists, can be really helpful because we have so many parts. As I was saying before, the narcissistic parent is chaos, right? And they're reflecting back different versions of the child to themselves at all times. They're different at all times. And so the child has to develop all these different parts that are essentially survival mechanisms or living mechanisms. Sometimes I think of healing just as living, that we're in like a constant state of, what would we say, conflict, and to heal is actually just to live. But the Buddhists say all life is suffering, which is a very simplistic reading of the First Noble Truth. Then all life is also healing.
mhm.
It's not one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like everyone's looking to get to that end gate, but to be human is to constantly be moving through those pillars of healing and gates.
I
So
like to push back on this idea that there's this destination of healed, and
yeah.
think of it more like healing is like a posture we take in how we engage with life, how we engage with our suffering. I have a funny little metaphor. It's we're climbing up a mountain and there's like this Yeti at the top of the mountain. He's throwing ice balls down at us. And we have to learn to keep climbing and dodging the ice balls, knowing that we're actually never going to get to the top of the mountain. The process of living is the process of climbing, right? And of striving and of just attempting to make sense of our experience. But it's not like I've made this mistake. I remember at one point I thought I was healed and I said, I'm never going to feel that way again. And that was probably the dumbest thing I've ever said because life is not really like that.
Life gave you probably a real life example of interacting with somebody or an experience that said, "Hey, we're actually gonna ask you to circle back to that again because I don't know
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
much you know that has been healed, or you might have to go even a little bit deeper this time."
I think that's what we were talking about before, Carl Jung talking about life as a Fibonacci spiral, not a straight line, where we keep coming back to these same experiences, but hopefully with a little bit of expanded consciousness and a little bit ability to feel deeper, to remain present more. And I think that's a really difficult thing for a lot of us. I know for me, it feels like regression because they told me there was healed. But I think, well, there's this line in a brilliant Amy Mann song from the movie Magnolia. I forget the name of the song, but it begins by saying, it's not what you thought when you first began it. And I think that kind of encompasses so much of shadow work of healing of living that like things don't really work the way we think they do, and that to heal is actually to feel. And a lot of that
Mhm.
means feeling some of the not so great emotions and remaining present and not seeking the escape of addiction or whatever mechanism of dissociation we have, but really learning to accept, what did they say in the Big Lebowski? The gutters and the strikes. And I just saw the Big Lebowski on the big screen last week. They played it. Yeah.
I love your vibrancy of, like, your film, your art, the music, and your sports. You're just so in it, and I have all men, I have all boys, and
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
were like, "I'm gonna give you a sports analogy before we press record," I'm like, "Okay, yeah, that would be speaking with my husband, yeah."
I think that's for me, that was part of the radical acceptance is that I'm all these different things. Like I was like my dad was a follower of this guy, Swami Rama, and then I owned like a new age bookstore and a new age record label. And then my mother sent me to Catholic school. And then I have all of these different, I was a basketball player until I wasn't. My degree has a lot of film and literature studies, but we're all these just blobs of experience that for me, it was like that experience of having my first spiritual template. The Swami Rama is not a good man, but
Mhm.
he
I
was
don't know much about him.
so he was the first yogi in the 70s. He went to this place called the Menninger Foundation and allowed himself to be observed as he did all these kind of physiological feats, you would say. So he was like in Donahue, he was in Playboy, and he was like this known guy, but he had to leave the country because of sexual misconduct. I had a therapist one time describe his crew as like a hive of spiritual narcissists. When you read his teachings, you can see very easily how in the Western mind it gets bent to narcissism. But having that, you talk a lot about birth. Apparently, he predicted my birth as a male child. My mother was having complications. He said, "Oh, that just means he's a boy. Boys always give their mothers problems." And so having this kind of yoga meditation spiritual template first and then being sent to Catholic school was really actually confusing. And I think a lot of my life has been trying to make sense of the East and West and spirituality. And what does it all mean? I remember being a child in Catholic school, sitting in religion class and having all these questions that I really couldn't ask because I don't think they would have been appropriate within that rigid spiritual setting. But I was engaging with it very differently than the people around me because of this yogi that had been present in my life. At one point, the Swami told my dad, "I'm your father now." And my dad had very little relationship with his own father. So in a lot of ways, the Swami was almost like a grandfather, even though I didn't have a lot of personal contact with him. He loomed large, and there's so many. It's so complicated. It would be easy to dismiss it as because of who he turned out to be bad, but it shaped me this kind of. Is it a cult? It was on Cult Launch, but it was the way I see human consciousness is centered in this kind of almost like Vedic tradition, basically, and reality and all of this stuff. And then being sent to it's just shaped my mind in so many ways that
That
it
I
was
think it probably is conflicting, but also really beautiful because it almost kept you so open to be someone to choose to heal.
precisely. Yeah. Yeah. I think my dad is such a difficult person. But as I was struggling with mental health issues as a teenager, my mother would push me towards meds and the kind of Western psychology. And my father would say, he couldn't bring himself to say, we provided an incredibly difficult familial situation. We say, oh, his girlfriend broke up with him. He would put it more in the realm of conditioned mind or environmental factors, which I think is more accurate than saying that depression runs in our family. I'd say to my mom, Grandpa was at Normandy. That's actually trauma. I didn't have those words as a child, but and so it offered a counterpoint to a lot of, I think, really unhealthy Western conditioning. Now, I don't like to idealize one thing or the other. No,
No, they mesh
it's
together, and it's funny
yeah.
that they find themselves my mother and father are similar, except from a farm rural perspective. So I grew up he would make my pathological narcissist father a lot of homegrown meals and broths, and when I was put on Ritalin as a child, eventually has said these, no, the educators don't know we're going to take her off because I was suicidal. Whereas, and my mother, more the mental health, but the two of them together being this paradox of
Yeah.
this framework in which you grow up in. And it's really interesting and
Yeah. I mean,
fascinating
for
how those
me,
come together.
they split up when I was 7, and my father basically stopped talking to my mother, like literally just iced her out, the
Yeah.
proverbial discard. And so it was really being raised in these two silos that didn't. And so, like, when my dad left, my mother was like broken. And so that was 7. By 10, she married a banker. And it was like, why aren't you a banker's kid? I'm like, because you raised me as a vegetarian until I was like 8. I had all this, it was,
Block on block of confusion.
yeah, I think that was a lot of my initial healing journey, was accepting both of those parts of me, that I'm not one or the other, that I'm
Yes.
somehow both. But my parents were, I don't have any memory of them ever having a cordial I don't have a single memory of them having a cordial conversation. I don't remember my life prior. I remember them announcing he was leaving, but that's really my first, and I was like 7. So I should have memories, but I don't really have fully formed memories prior to that, which is difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting because, like you shared with me too, this natural birth that your mother
Yeah, yeah,
experienced with you,
yeah, yeah. So
this
I was a
profound.
home birth.
So,
Yeah.
not in the Western setting, you weren't pulled out via forceps or
No,
C-sectioned. So,
no.
your mother caught you and had you
Story
at
was, my
home.
dad would always joke I was there with my catcher's mitt on. It's, but it was, in a way, it's like a metaphor for my life, because it seems almost like an illusion, right? They were living in this mansion on a lake, but it wasn't theirs. They were caretaking it. There was all of this. When you look at the pictures, it seems more about my mother than me, and that all of it feels like false advertising almost.
Right.
That like my dad and his yoga and meditation stuff, I'm not sure what he's taught meditation at a college level, but
Never taught you.
never taught us. No,
Right.
because he's a narcissist. There was no value for him sitting in a room with his 2 kids. A narcissist wants to be perceived as the thing.
Yeah.
They don't care about being the thing. And so, just like the Swami was all into women, even though he claimed celibacy, this was something very different than like him wanting to share this thing he centered his life in. He finally started to teach me to meditate when I was about 3 months out of, prior to going to rehab, when I had various nose drug problems, we'll say, and I could barely breathe, but he's so into himself that he didn't really even notice.
And isn't that interesting how even that addiction, like you said, you could barely breathe? Like that was your last calling of your body, even what you chose to be addicted
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
would almost bring you to that halt.
Right.
I
Well,
can't breathe,
I think,
suffocating
yeah,
in my
I
own
think
auric field.
addiction to me is about like lost connection in early childhood, that it's actually about, I think when you have narcissistic parents, you don't get that initial connection to the parent,
Yeah.
and that hole remains in your life, and you never learn to self-soothe, because you learn to self-soothe by being properly soothed, right? Like the parents function, good parents should function as a mirror, reflecting the self states back to the child, teaching the child to soothe themselves by soothing them. And when you don't get that, you really believe. And I think basketball was an addiction for me. I don't think it's limited to what we think about as traditional addiction. That I think, like, when I think of basketball, I think it was compulsive dopamine delivery services. Like, I started playing soccer and I was really good, but like you could score 2 goals a game. That's 2 dopamine hits. Basketball, you could score a
Interesting.
bunch, and I couldn't control anything in my life, but if I could control putting the ball in the hoop, people loved me. If I threw an elbow out in recess on the playground, I got in trouble. If I threw that same elbow in the context of a basketball game, like taking out aggression, I was cheered. And when I was 16, the summer between my sophomore and junior year, my house burned down. I lost everything I owned. My father had just built a massive house 5 minutes from my mother's house. He didn't ask us to live with him. And so I was shuffled between residence inns and condos and all this stuff, and ended up getting in trouble for smoking pot. And I just quit. And that proverbial shift of like sports to drugs, I don't think it's as simple. I think they serve the same purpose. Like, for whatever reason, like the sports didn't bring me self-confidence. It didn't bring me the things.
That you actually were looking for back in that childhood,
Yeah.
soft, gentle landing place, right?
Yeah.
And I think that happens with men sex, pornography, the drugs, it's just all weaves in, and when you have a line, especially if you're the male in that, it's really difficult.
I think it's all dopamine. It's also all dissociation that when you have unacknowledged trauma as a child,
Mhm.
I don't think we have hobbies. I think everything we gravitate towards is something that takes us out of the trauma that we don't understand. And yeah, pornography, I was sexualized early. And that's been a part of my healing is establishing healthy relationships to anything that might be bent to dissociation, that might be used as a way to avoid. I think of trauma as creating a lack of safety in the moment. And so anything that can take us out of that moment becomes compulsive and can be looked at as an addiction. But I think the culture is changing a little bit, but in decades past, the focus on the substances themselves, and you've just been ensnared by this substance. I don't really believe that to be true. I believe it's about the mind and the mind's need for some sort of connection or escape. And those two things aren't really mutually exclusive.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm curious, is that why you chose the name hypervigilance for social?
That's funny because I didn't really think too much about that. My
Oh,
original,
really?
no, that's what I mean. These are like casual one offs, and then all of a sudden that's my name. Like my initial name on TikTok was smoking and thinking because I literally would blow bong hits into the camera to start each video. The idea being like I was at this point of out of rehab, right? But also in this radical acceptance point that there was this pushback I had. Now I haven't had a drink since I went to rehab. But there was this pushback to this narrative that drugs and alcohol were the overarching story and the problem, and that it was actually trauma. And so when I set out, my name was Smoking and Thinking, and what I wanted to do was recreate some sort of like we're sitting in a circle just talking, and the idea of, and obviously it was a little performative, but I was very open at that point in my life. I looked crazy, right? It was about me. When I started, I didn't expect anybody to watch. And
Yeah.
uh, there was there was a catharsis in speaking into a camera and hearing myself and seeing myself in a way of building myself and learning to perceive myself a little clearly. I think one of the main disasters with narcissistic parents is self-perception, is that they reflect back, they become an unreliable narrator in our lives because I think of narcissism as a reality distortion disorder. I think
Mhm.
the popular culture version of it misses the point when we're focused on all of these kind of behaviors.
Yeah.
It's actually about the system itself. And this is one thing that really bothers me about Western psychology is that it seems to be more behavioralism, it's like defining these things through behaviors, but it's actually about the internal experience of consciousness. But the reality is the only consciousness you can know is yourself. Like they can't quantify nor observe a person's internal state. And like when we talk of narcissism, it's 5 out of 9 of traits. I don't believe that. To me, that's bullshit. That narcissism, the traits-based narcissism is sure that's one thing, right?
Yeah,
But to me, pathological narcissism is the entire makeup of the person's consciousness. It's not 5 out of 9 traits.
absolutely.
It's rooted. The theories I like have it rooted in kind of what Melanie Klein calls the paranoid schizoid position, what Freud would call the primary process. There's this guy, Michael Robbins, he would call it the primordial mind, that they're trapped in they don't, their consciousness doesn't evolve to
Mhm.
individuate. And so they actually mistake self for world. So it's like they lack the internal container of self. They have a grandiose false self, but that's made up of how they're perceived. And so they lack this internal container of self. And so they displace all the elements that we would hold internally onto the world around them.
That's
And
right.
it's not like they see themselves as the world in some Eastern sense of oneness. It's
No.
tyrannical. They see their internal self state as governing the external reality of everybody around them. And
And that is rooted in trauma from
yeah,
them
I mean, I
to
get so early and that it's not trauma. I think this is part of the reason it's almost untreatable is because it's not cognitive trauma. It's the baseline of their consciousness, basically.
Yeah,
And so,
right.
like, to treat it, you,
Interesting.
there's no self there, right? To
No,
revert to, right?
right.
There's nothing there except this kind of infant mind, right? Which is why when you poke at them, think of like projection. Think of an infant crying out. What are they doing? They're projecting their emotional state onto the world around them in hopes to get their needs met. Now just consider a narcissist as an infant. But this is where it gets weird, because how are they going out and behaving as a person? This primordial mindset, I think, is really interesting, which is, think of like human consciousness before cognitive thought takes over, of just almost, it's like somatic mind. They call it like the body mind. And so what feels good to them is true. What feels bad to them is not true. And that the role of language and the role of cognitive thought in their behavior is not the same. When they say they can't self-reflect, to me, that suggests they don't really turn their behavior into cognitive thought the way we do.
Mm.
They don't.
And what happens? Is that in utero, I wonder? Or is that just an Akashic timeline that they are
Well, to
choosing
me,
in this
that
lifetime?
to me, that's one of the big questions in psychology and consciousness
Yeah.
formation. We can never really understand in utero conditioning, the earliest stages of mind development, the mental health of the mother. They say if a mother is in a relationship with a narcissist, it creates so much cortisol or whatever that it affects the child. And so there's all of these factors that we can't really, how would we, I believe
Yeah,
it's
it
in the
is.
conditioned mind.
It
And
is
like,
interesting though.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
It is yeah, it is really fascinating to start wondering, how was it that we were exposed to that and our fathers were exposed to that? Like they didn't morph out of that, but we did.
Well,
It's
right.
it
And so there's like talk of the genetic component to it, which, I think the nature nurture thing is always nonsense, because it's both. I think, like, how do I like to say it? It's like the genetics set out the possible ingredients and then the environment cooks the meal, basically.
right.
So it might, like there might be a genetic component that would create the possibility for narcissism, but the environment would still have to activate it. But this
Mm.
whole like pre-verbal conditioning, in utero conditioning, the mind is conditioned, right, through experience. And it's like a billion different data points interacting with each other. And I'm not really sure. I think when we look at the traits-based narcissism, I think it's easier to draw it to like specific traumas.
Yeah.
But this idea of a kind of stalled consciousness, it's, a lot of people think it's like mirroring back, but who knows? I don't know. It's like, why does one kid in a family become a narcissist and another doesn't? Then it's,
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. And I've had this discussion with a girlfriend, and she said that she knows why she came back in the family she did with the brother she had, because of a past life sort of situation that needed to work itself out. Okay,
Mhm.
there's a belief there. But it is really interesting how people decide to cope and or function most often. I was heard this stat the other day that 95% of people are generally working through some type of dysfunctional trauma and upheaval upbringing.
I haven't read it. I've got it right here, The Myth of Normal. I actually just got it on Audible too, the Gabor Mate book, The Myth of
Yeah.
Normal.
Oh, yes.
What's a normal mind? A normal mind is actually about culture, not biology. That the mind is shaped by the culture in which it arises. There's another great book right here called Dark Matter of the Mind, the Culturally Articulated Unconscious. And so the mind is shaped by the culture. And when we think of mental health, there is no normal brain. That there is to me, it's like mental eugenics. That's what we're going through right now, is this idea that there are these brains that you're supposed to feel this way, that way, or the other thing. It's actually about cultural expectations and cultural norms. And are you conditioned by the culture properly, basically to not feel or see things
Which is why I think so many people are now being prescribed antidepressants as well.
well,
That
right.
statistic is insane right now.
It's totally crazy. I have another funny little metaphor for that. To me, it's, if this were physical health, it'd be like all these kids are showing up in the ER with broken arms, but there's this really profitable cast company or cast industry.
Yeah.
And because there's this cast industry, they don't want to know how these arms are getting broken. But if you just stepped outside, you'd see there's this fucking guy hitting them in the head, in the arm with a hammer, breaking their arms. They're breaking our minds and then telling us
Yeah.
we're broken.
Absolutely.
We're living in ways, technology, I don't want to get on my soapbox about technology, but it's changed what it means to be human. And it's changed so many things so rapidly that the human mind is struggling to keep up. And instead of creating different ways of living, we're just pathologizing human existence down to the millisecond and telling everybody they're sick because that's what makes money. And
Yeah.
again, if you're going to tell me what sickness is, you have to clearly define what health is. And that's what they're not doing. What's healthy in this culture? Making money. If you can make money,
Yeah.
You can support yourself. You don't have to submit yourself to mental health. It's rooted in productivity and kind of cultural expectations. And I always love the Judeo Krishnamurti quote. It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that's what it is that
Can
like,
you say that again?
it's no measure of health to be, oh, it's no measure of health to be adapted to a profoundly sick society. And it's like, we have a sick culture, and to me, this speaks to the kind of like trauma model versus mental illness model, that the trauma model would indict the culture itself and would say these are mental injuries, not mental illnesses, and something's being done to us. The mental health and illness model says there's something wrong with the individual, right? And we can see where this culture would avoid the reality that a lot of these mental health conditions that are being classified in the DSM are actually trauma responses, right? That they're responses to an environment that is not conducive to like
To
feelings.
health, yeah, and allowing those healthy feelings to present themselves. And I don't know, have you ever read the book People of the Lie? It's Dr.
No,
Scott
like
Peck.
I've heard of it. I've never read it. I know
Okay.
it's about narcissism.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, but it was the very first book I read, but there is a really fascinating, this true story of these two brothers, and the one brother committed suicide with a gun. And the parents, normal parents, like cut their lawn, paid their taxes, but their oldest son was really affected, of course, by his brother killing himself. These parents that Christmas gifted this oldest son the gun that their youngest son had killed himself.
That's insane. But literally insane.
But this is what we're talking about in terms of realities, right? And when that was, as Dr. Scott Peck got to this and he said, okay, they got you a gun, didn't your brother just, he pieced it all together and then spoke to the parents about it. And they said they were just outraged that they would be ostracized about thinking that was an inappropriate gift, right? And
Can't let a good gun go to waste, I guess.
that's truly how they felt. Like that's
Yeah.
truly what they thought. And so that is a different type of crazy making, let's say, but just incongruent behavior where it leaves such open spaces for such wounds to be in
I
people
mean,
and
again,
living.
I think to me, when I think of narcissists and lying, I think sure they can lie intentively, but I also think that their construction of reality is a lie, that it's a
Yeah.
reality distortion thing. It's more when you drill it down, sure, there's intentional lying, but there's compulsive confabulating where the narcissist constructs a reality,
Yeah.
not like the way they use language. I think this is part of the primordial mind where language isn't symbolic, it's concrete. So once they use language not to describe reality, but to create reality, once they say something out loud, it becomes true. And I think they're all in on it, that
Mhm.
there are instances where they're intentionally lying, but I don't think true pathological narcissism, they live in a different reality. Basically, we all live in our own
For
reality.
sure. For
There
sure.
is no actual objective reality because all reality as experienced by human beings is filtered through the individual mind, meaning there isn't anything out there other
I
than what our mind.
And then we get to decide how we all want to be together and interact together. And I think you and I have talked about that, about this sort of cycling that you go through when you do set boundaries with narcissistic relationships and parents and your families of origin and bloodline. It's a tricky one to really cycle through and be with. And you can go back and forth inside your own realities of, yeah, heartache and disappointment and guilt and shame and also triumph. Wow, we've come so far on the path of healing, but there's a lot of setbacks and cycling that happens in that
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. I think of reality, shared reality as like a negotiation or a kind of like collaboration that once we realize each of us experiences things a little differently, it can be very liberating. It can be scary. It can be a lot of things. But what it does is help us, I think, connect to other people or disconnect if we have to. If
Yeah.
their reality is incongruous with ours, I think of
Yeah.
narcissistic parents. We were created in this reality and think of it like a planet, right? And the reality is the atmosphere. And we have to like use our anger and defiance to break out of this false reality. But then once we get out into the freedom of space, it's very destabilizing, and disorienting because it's like we are now shaping our own reality. And we weren't really taught
Got
living in an authoritarian situation with our narcissistic parents that defined everything,
Yeah.
that controlled everything. And so we need to get free. But then once we do, we have to like do away with whatever expectations we have and realize we're starting fresh and accept ourselves in a state of almost helplessness,
Yeah.
and then begin to teach ourselves how to be people. It can be really scary. I think that's one of the things they don't talk about is
Mhm.
it's with narcissistic abuse, specifically in parents, is we don't really own our lives. And so it's hard to take ownership over them. I'm not going to say it's like comforting to have the lives controlled, but there's like a lack of agency that we have. And it's really hard to cultivate that in adulthood. I think Bessel van der Kolk calls it like the reflex of purpose in the body keeps the score, which is like this internal kind of motivator just to go out in the world and act in service of our own needs and be a proactive person. The narcissist denies their children that. The narcissist kind of places themselves in the seat of consciousness of the child. And I don't know, it's
That
a
hit
lot of,
hard. And
it-
also in our experience as well, there was money involved, which
yeah,
sometimes can be really confusing as well. Like it just
yeah.
adds a whole other element to the healing, the structure of healing.
Money, like everything else, is an energy. And so much of what the narcissistic parent does is create systems of trauma around these energies. And so the money energy becomes about control and power. And so the narcissist, I call it Potemkin parenting. Like in an authoritarian state, you'd have a Potemkin village where they walk some reporters through and it looks like there's these storefronts and everything. And it looks like a thriving little thing. But then you go in and there's nothing behind the storefront. And so the narcissistic parent will meet the child's needs, but it's more out of their desire to be perceived a certain way than actually understanding and meeting the child's needs. And it creates all of this dysfunction around meeting our own needs. And money is one of the things that it's ugly to talk about, but we need it. Like I went through a phase where my dad gave me a lot of money, right, in my life, but it was just in lieu of parenting. And so it would just go through me because I couldn't hold it. Like when I went to college, there was an open discussion about whether my mom and dad should give me a credit card. And it was determined I'd be spoiled if I had a credit card. And so instead, they gave me something like $2,000 a month in cash when I had a drug problem. Make that make sense? I can't. But what it taught, like a kid needs credit. Like in my upbringing, where I was around, other parents help their children begin their financial life, not spoil them, but help. I didn't have a credit card until like my 40s, right? Because this created this energy around it where I didn't
Mhm.
think I deserved one. Think of what that tells a kid. You're spoiled if you have a credit card. No, you're being taught to live in the financial reality of the United States of America, where we're a debt-based culture. It's so crazy, but I still struggle with money. I have this deep-rooted scarcity fear and terror that I'm going to be homeless, that I'm going to be left alone. And if you look at the financial details of my life, people would say that's crazy. But again, think of the house burning down, right? And so
Yeah,
my house burned down. I'm 16. I lose everything I own. My dad has just built a huge house
around the
and that house is not accessible to me. He doesn't say, come
structure.
live with us, right? Then this is crazy. Then a year goes by. We finally get back into the house my mother rebuilt. She's so frustrated with my dad and not doing anything. She searches my room, finds a bong, and kicks me out like a month after we're finally back in the house to go live with my dad, who tells me, this isn't your house. We don't want you here. And so then I have to live in this house where I don't even like, my stepmother designs my room. Nothing in it is mine. And so there's all this material safety around. None of it is accessible to me. And in fact, it's outwardly being told this isn't yours.
Yours. That's
Right.
right.
And so then I go back to my stepdad's house, which also doesn't feel like mine. And this gets me to the point where a lot of times narcissistic parents deny their children a sense of ownership. This sounds really weird, but we don't feel like we own anything. We
Yeah,
don't understand our
how that
lives,
works.
that anything can be taken from us on a whim, on a narcissistic whim where they don't. I think that was one of the big mistakes my mother made, was constantly trying to push me on my father because he didn't do anything. He's a sociopath. He'd take us on Saturdays and we'd go to a movie, which I thought he loved movies. Now it was just like the easiest, cheapest thing to burn 2 hours. We'd go watch him get suits. We'd just trail him around as he did what he needed to do. But
Do
what did that teach us? Nothing. Taught us we don't really matter.
matter. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I'm all over the place with this one.
You are not. There is so much that, of course, is being reflected back from me also in such similar experiences. And that's why I'm just so filled with gratitude that a dear sister shared you with me because you've had a multitude of life experiences in such young, pivotal, they're really rite of passage ages that should have been so protected and loved and guided and held. And it was just filled with so much confusion
Yeah.
and dishonesty and power and psychological psychopathic behavior.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to also meet people who have lived those experiences. I remember after my father had fired us, he evicted us from the home that we were renting from and took our car and a cell phone. And I was just about to get married. My husband and I, we got married. A few months later, it was Christmas, and he sent me a Christmas card that had dogs peeing on snowmen, and I think there was maybe like a 50 or $100 check. He just donated $75,000 to the local food bank, but just to say, this is pretty much sums up my year.
Yeah. I
And
think
you're
that's
like,
why I wanted to talk today was
"Whoa."
that the content for me has veered so far from me just sharing myself that I really thought going back into these places would actually help me realign myself with myself, basically. Because we, I don't know if this would resonate, but it's like our sense of self seems to be on a timer with narcissistic parents where we're always forced to be different things. And so it's for me, creating content and getting social media attention really took me away from myself. And this has been a nice journey back into the core of this experience and kind of exploring because all of this, it's painful, but it's true. And the truth is freedom in a certain way. In the kind of honestly, when I started this, all I wanted was to create community around this. I'd been emerging from going to AA and all that bullshit you do and like rehab. And I realized how much power there is in just sitting with somebody that's experienced what you've sat with and just sharing these kind of it's like opening up this portal of authenticity and vulnerability and existing in it. And it's to me like it's odd to say, but it's the most calming thing for me is to just talk about these things.
It's calming as for me to also hear, and it's puts because you're eloquent with your words and loving, and it allows a space to self-reflect and be like, "Okay, wow, these things are true."
I learned in rehab for whatever reason. I think honestly, like a lot of us children of narcissists become eloquent because we're trying to convince these parents to see things from our perspective. And so we develop all this linguistic skill because we think it's us. We think if only I can explain it to them, if only I can find the right words, they'll understand and they'll love me. But eventually we realize they can't hear it because they're broken, not because we are. And it's all of this, and I get emotional. This is good. It's such bittersweet awareness, right? It's like, it's heartbreaking in a true sense of the word, but it's also true, right? And so the most important thing for us is to find our truth, right? Is to cut through all of this distorted reality and accept the pain in a certain way, and not in a masochistic way, but like
No, and not
just
in a victim way.
no. I think that exactly.
Yeah,
There's this pivot where it's
yeah.
so, especially when we're talking about narcissism, like it drives me fucking insane. So much of the content is about the narcissist. But here's the best thing you'll ever hear about narcissistic abuse recovery. It's actually about your relationship to yourself, not your relationship to the narcissist. What we want to do is kick them the fuck out of our internal life, right? And like all of the abuse is about the narcissist. Therefore, all of the healing or most of the healing has to be about us. There has to be this pivot from binging. Understanding narcissism is one thing. Recovering from narcissistic abuse is another. And we have to center ourselves. We have to put ourselves in the main character position of our own story. And we have to accept it's like, this is where it leads me to this place of this, like, how do we truly like detach from our parents, right? Like, we talk about going no contact. Okay, but I'm looking at myself. I look like my dad. I'm hearing myself. I hear him. And so it's both acceptance and detachment. It's all of these contradictory things.
And I think I know for me, there's parts at some stages I've pulled and said, I really appreciated that. I really loved that from him.
Yeah.
I gained that. but I'm gonna leave that. Oh, okay. I see that. It's
Lovely.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's that juxtaposition in all of this healing that you can thank it and honor it and love it and also say, "Oh, okay."
I think to me that's so resonant because we come back. I was so angry for so long that
Yeah.
like when it started to come out, I couldn't stop it. I told you there's a restraining order on me from my dad because I had to express it. But then you come out of it, and being whole isn't just accepting our darkness; it's accepting our light.
Mm,
It's not just shadow work. Isn't always about negative things. For us, our entire authentic self was taken from us and repressed. And so it's also about saying, you know what? There are elements of him that I celebrate in myself.
yes.
And
Absolutely,
I don't
Christian.
have to make it make sense. I just have to accept,
Absolutely.
right? Like
Absolutely.
at some point we have to like stop intellectualizing and just be, just
Yeah.
accept, right? That these things are entirely complicated. Like when I miss my dad, there's this part of me that steps up and starts to hate myself. Why
Right.
would you miss this person that's created so much pain? And then this other part steps in and says,
Thinking.
you miss him because he's your father and you're not him, right? Because you can miss somebody, you can love somebody, and regardless of his ability to connect to me, I connected to him. A child, their only safety is connection to their parents. And so we will bend and we will break in order to connect to them. But it's real. I sometimes describe them as they're like a light socket with no energy, but we keep plugging in. We keep trying. We keep hoping, oh my God, maybe this time. And the healing, again, is understanding this process. I don't think anybody deserves this, but it shapes us in ways that can create immense compassion, that can create
Yeah.
immense awareness, that can create the capacity for true connection with people. When you realize the lack of connection, you can start to exist in real connection. That it's on these things. There's a great, I'm not going to remember the quote, but it's a Haruki Murakami, who's a Japanese author I like a lot. And it's about people don't connect through happiness. They connect through reality, through sadness, through pain, through all of these things. And I think that's really true.
Mm.
My little cat is,
She's probably feeling all this energy. Oh,
yeah.
I just love I think I took a screenshot of one of your reels once because you look so amazing with your little orange cat in your hood, and it was just, like, so precious.
Here we go. His name is Selassie.
Selassie? What does that
Yes.
mean?
After Haile Selassie, who's like emperor of Ethiopia and the kind of God figure in Rastafarianism, but they call him the conquering lion, which is what made me name him because he's the conquering
He's your
lion.
conquering lion.
Yeah.
Don't you love how cats always pick up on exactly when they need to come into your auric field too, and just
Yeah.
hold it?
He's been really
Oh,
healing for me. I have two of them. And I think they came into my life at a time where I needed to, I always say with
he's so
cats, like
beautiful.
when we have emotionally unresponsive parents, we're taught that our emotions don't matter, that our emotional state, our affection, none of it matters. But when I pet Selassie, he purrs. And in that purring, he tells me and he teaches me that my affection matters. I love him.
And I think men and boys of narcissistic parents, that is such an important one. I think for me, different genetically, just in mothering, I think it
Yeah.
comes through differently in the genetics, but I think my brother could really relate to that as well in a lot of ways, needing that reminder because it's a different sort of hormonal response as you're also growing up through those experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I had to learn, I had so much anger and so much emotion coursing through me and ability, no ability to really feel it. And I think you're exactly right. For the boys, we're taught to bottle it all up. We're taught to just push through and it's unsustainable. And so I think learning, I also think with
What was
pets,
sorry, what was
oh,
the
go ahead.
most helpful sort of first step with all that rage? Where'd you take it?
Getting sober was really helpful in learning to remain present with the feelings. I think for me, the expression of anger got really intoxicating almost. And when I started to really express it, it just all came out. It ended up being a little destructive.
Okay.
But I think the best thing for me was writing, was just identifying
Oh,
I'm angry and here's what I'm angry about, or I'm sad. I remember early on I'd carry around this little notepad, and it was like emotional mindfulness of just checking in with what I was feeling. Cause in the old days, the anger would come out at teachers, or once I got older, when I was drinking, there would be like phases of my drunk, and there'd be like Professor Chris, that was fun. And then there'd be like really dark blackouts where I didn't remember anything, but I was told real anger would come out. And so rehab was a really transformational experience for me. I stayed for 3 months. My family didn't come at all. But what I learned was to be accepted through the various groups and to sit with people who would see me and would hug me and would hold me as I learned to feel, basically, learn to feel loved, basically. And I think it's such a bittersweet experience because so many of my friends from that time are dead. You go to rehab and not everybody makes it. And even that becomes somewhat of a lesson in dealing with loss and dealing with grief. But those rooms, I look back like, why did I stay so long? Like, why was I not wanting to leave? And I realized that it was the people. It was like being accepted just for me. I think that's why rehab to me is so beautiful, is whoever you are on the outside disappears, and you'll have these high powered lawyers sitting next to these basically like street kids, and the street kid is helping the lawyer. There's just this, there's also problematic personalities, obviously, but like there's just this real human connection that goes on that really set me on the path I'm on of just wanting to connect and help people.
Thank you for that. Thank you for doing what you're doing. My nose is running. You've just hit every emotion in my soul. Just because thank you for doing that work and stepping out and using your voice. And then also just centering back to you too, centering back for your healing and for just coming on and sharing your heart because like our stories and experiences matter.
Yeah.
And it's so much bigger than a reel on Instagram.
That's the thing. I think like sharing our story and finding acceptance both internally and externally in the reality of our stories, and narrative therapy or story therapy, it is real. That there's something very freeing about showing ourselves after we've lived a life of hiding and just allowing ourselves to feel, even if it's sadness or we're overwhelmed with emotion. I think to me, crying is one of the most beautiful things human beings do because it's telling our fellow human beings, like, give me a hug, care for me. And it's just it's a beautiful thing to be able to share these spaces and have these types of conversations. So thank you as well.
Thank you for speaking on behalf of the children of narcissists because so much that's out there is around marriages
Mm.
and relationships. And that is also really important. But again, like it almost feels like in that healing, like the children get forgotten. You try to have to,
That's literally why I started talking about it, is because I thought like this is, and in reality, in dealing with people, a lot of times if you found yourself in 5 relationships in a row with narcissists, it's about your family, right? That these things are actually more intertwined. But I found the conversation to be less than satisfying for the children of narcissists. That just like in the narcissistic family systems, you're right, the children get forgotten. And there seems, I one of those self-aware narcissists who I can't stand one time tell me he quote didn't do it to his kids. And I'm like, then you don't understand what you're talking about. This isn't something that's turned on and off. But yeah.
so you protect your energy and step back from that one. But
Yeah.
geez, it's so important the work you're doing. And I was hoping you could share with the beautiful souls who felt resonant to listen in on this story medicine with Christian, like how people can work with you, the ways you're serving humanity right now,
Yeah.
and what that looks like.
Yeah, I'm not good at the business side of it, so I don't really have a website or anything. People usually just contact me through Instagram. We set up a meeting on Zoom. And what I do is more witnessing. I see my role, it's always a little different, but how I see myself is as an empathetic witness and informed collaborator. That what I want to do is create a space for people's authentic self to move in and then witness them and mirror them back an accurate version of themselves, which a lot of time is building them up. I think one of the flaws in therapy if you're not feeling great, does it really help you to have diagnoses thrown at you? What about looking for what's right instead of what's wrong? What about just creating space for people to feel, right? And to be witnessed? And I've been trying to be a little bit more businesslike, but it's just not really me. Like I just don't, I'm just, when I start to think of it that way, it doesn't go well for me. And so if people want to reach out, it's mainly through Instagram.
Yeah.
TikTok was where I started, but it became unsafe for me over there. They allow imposter accounts. So people will like take all my work, pretend to be me and start contacting my followers, soliciting money, and TikTok won't take them down. And so that's really creepy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I just what came through for me when you were just expressing, like, how you're serving humanity is, like, just a really gentle landing space for
Mhm.
people to come as they're moving through their
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah. I think for a lot of us children of narcissists, traditional therapy's been a mixed bag. A lot of us were sent to therapy as kids as like a punishment, but it was therapy within the context of the distorted reality that we're living. Right. So it's what I want to do is help people live in their own realities, help people
Mm,
see themselves more clearly through mirroring back what's called reality testing, what the truth of their story was, what the truth of their present is, what the truth of their power is, because we all have the power to transform our lives. We just have to let go of who we were in a certain way, that there's
yeah, there's that energy there to still, yeah, work with, and I was gonna ask you, what are things that, like, really feed your soul right now and, like, really help, like, build
into,
you and your nervous system as you
yeah,
navigate working on the online space and
it's
also still healing.
it's been hard for me actually, like the last couple of years. I find the more connected we are online, it's very easy to become disconnected offline. And for me, it's been refocusing on person to person relationships. It's been I reconnected with my mother, which is a mixed bag, but just continuing to grow. I think it's a difficult environment right now to be healing because it feels like the world is too much. And so for me, it's about focusing more on my immediate present, focusing more on my life offline,
Mm,
and protecting myself a little more from the energy vampires that exist in the online space. Because I think when I started out, it felt really safe and I was just blasting off. And now it feels almost dangerous. And so I don't know how to answer that. It's difficult. So
yeah, okay. So you're
I'm
in that
trying.
you're
I'm
trying
trying
to
to. Yeah, yeah. I think all of this just happened. I didn't plan on any of it, and so I think getting back a posture of gratitude is really important for me because I think if you told me 5 years ago this would be my life, I'd be ecstatic. But sometimes I struggle in the present with seeing that, and it feels crushing in certain ways. But that's also part of the work is accepting responsibility for my life, accepting success in a certain way, accepting who I am and what it means. And I struggle a lot with imposter syndrome. Why do people come to me? Like, why do I have all this in a certain way? Or
mm,
why am I looked at the way I'm looked at online? And the challenge for me is to continue seeing myself clearly.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that there are particular hearts that can really you mean you definitely have just such a sharp mind and memory and life experience. What a beautiful place where you sit in a very humble chair in your humble heart sharing.
Yeah.
And that's really the energy
Yeah.
that is so present there because socials is such an interesting place of so many people who want to be self-proclaimed prophets in
Yeah.
such a
Yeah.
crazy
And
way.
I've never wanted that. That's what makes this a little weird for me is that I didn't really set out for what happened. Like I didn't set out to help people. People just started asking me if they could talk to me. And I knew I could do it, but the scale that it's just, it's been,
You're integrating it all.
yeah, yeah, I'm a wounded healer. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that and they reflect back some sort of authority figure. And I reject that in the space of healing, that there are the authority of your own journey is you.
Yeah.
That's it. There is no My dad Swami used to say, a guru is like a boat, and you use that boat to get from one side of the river to the other, but you leave the boat in the river. And I think one thing that I struggle with is that healing has been a commodity, and so many people want to be healed, or they're looking for some sort of savior, but they're looking externally when the answer is internally. And how do you teach people that? Like,
Mhm.
how do you teach people that the
The work
answers
is
that they're
inside.
seeking are inside of you, that they're not there? There's nobody that can tell you how to live your life. There's nobody that can tell you how to heal. There's only a willingness to sit with whatever your nervous system and your mind produce and recognize that as right and true, even when it's dysfunctional. Because in that recognition, nervous systems, for me, that's been a really hard part, is it felt like something dysregulated. I didn't feel nervous system dysregulation early on. And then I got COVID and everything seemed to change. And I don't have a proper narrative in that. Is it the COVID, or is it that like I have this theory that like when we can't feel as children, we leave our bodies and we go into our minds, right? And so all of that psychic energy that's produced in the feelings becomes rumination, becomes mental activity. And so is it just that I've dropped back into my body and I'm actually feeling these things? The mind needs a narrative for all this stuff. And I don't really know what
Mm.
mine is right now. I just know that I feel a lot. For me, it's actually been fear. There's been an influx the last couple of years of just this visceral fear. And I think back to my childhood, and I was a scared child that was never saying I'm scared, but something as simple as going home from my buddies down the street at dark, I'd sprint home. I was like scared of sharks and like lakes. And trying to honor those parts of me is hard because it's visceral. It's not cognitive. It's how do you calm a nervous
The
system?
nervous system.
There's lots of creators and people online that claim to have the answer, but I don't know if that actually helps people or makes them feel less than when they can't do it through these
Mm.
approved methods.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think sometimes it comes back to just being as simple as a gentle breath,
Yeah.
like how we started life.
Yeah. Yeah. Returning, I find myself doing a lot of intentive
But
breathing, uh,
yeah,
and trying to just center myself and make myself safe through
your
acknowledging
breath.
life coming in and out.
Yeah. I think that sometimes the most it's the original way that we all decided to reincarnate here is by
Yeah.
take that
Mhm.
breath.
Yeah. Yeah, you asked what's the best thing, or I forget the simplicity, really, simplicity of thought,
Mhm.
simplicity of action, accepting that like health exists in simple terms and that so much of our mind creates complexities in
Yeah.
situations that demand simplicity, and breaking things down into digestible bites instead of eating the whole pizza at once. And I think technology and modern life is layering so many complexities onto existence that if we can just slow things down a bit, it helps us.
I agree. It's so funny. I was just talking about that with my husband because we're trying to figure out how to save all of our photos and videos because like back in the day, like you take it with your camera and then you'd plug it in your computer and then you'd make a folder, right? But
Mm,
now it's like you just keep buying storage to
yeah,
just house all of it.
I have the
And it's
same
like
problem.
and it's chaos. Like my phone and photos and videos are chaos. So it actually hasn't made it easier having
No,
these things.
no,
Having the
no.
home video where you
Like
like had to
OneDrive, and there's just all these different, are they there everywhere and nowhere all at once?
yeah, that's what we were saying. It's crazy.
Yeah, I have the same problem.
So,
I think those of us that are like, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 47, and we're like straddling two worlds,
yeah,
basically, like
I'm
the world
fine.
before the internet and the world after the internet. And it's a disorienting, intentive engagement with technology is an important part of quality of life, is deciding how much we're going to engage with these things. I think of technology and this one saying, just because we can, should we, is always in the back of my mind, both on a scale of what they're doing, like what they're creating, but also our engagement with it. Is we have to manage our relationship to information and our relationship to technology the same way we manage our relationships to other people.
Mhm.
Because in a lot of ways, our relationship to information is the most important relationship we have right now because we're being bombarded with it. Think of like how much information when we were kids, we take in on a day-to-day basis. Now think of now with these cell phones and everything. It's too much in a lot of ways.
Too much. Absolutely, the overdrives. Oh, this was I feel like I got to all my questions, Christian.
Good.
Do you feel like there's anything else that
No,
was
fine.
on your
Yeah.
heart?
I've been needing a conversation like this. Like I said, like my content veers into all sorts of things, and it's been a lot of politics lately, and it's just so draining and dreadful that getting back into my core of what I set out to do, which is share my story in hopes of connection, right? That we don't share our stories out of ego.
No.
We share our stories out of love and out of a hope that if I say something about my story that somebody's been alone with in their mind and they think nobody else has experienced, then I've accomplished what I wanted, which is connection. I think our value hierarchies as children of narcissists are a little different. That what we're really seeking, for better or worse, is connection to other human beings. And this feels real to me having these types of conversations.
It was really real, and even to commit to do it, there was an energetic even to
Yeah.
try to press record today, and
I get
so
really nervous. Like I've been doing podcasts and it's a different vibe than like just talking into a phone by myself making content. And so I still
right.
have a lot of my nervous system and my body are not great right now.
They're
Just,
asking to be held.
yeah. Yeah.
Go back to your breath. We're so glad you took that first breath when you
Yeah.
were born. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
coming on today and just sharing your wisdom and just even parts of your story medicine. I know there's so much more there, but I
you. Yeah.
think that there's so many codes in there for those that choose to take this in, and just so much love to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Love right back.
Thank you for being here, everybody. We will catch you on the next episode.